Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 3 of the webinar series. My name is Harry Wavell, and I'm part of the learning team here at the MacArthur Foundation. And this week's session is all about circular economy business models. We're going to be diving into what does that mean, what do they look like, and sharing some of our favorite examples of it in practice. And I'm joined today by my wonderful colleague, Monica. Monica, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello, everybody. Really excited to be joining this today. And yeah, so my name is Monica. I'm part of the learning team as well, and also work with the business team. And yeah, I'm really looking forward as we have a very special guest come in today. But before we do that, I'd like to actually go through a little bit where we are right now, because there were a number of sessions already that we had, and there's still a few to come. So probably a good moment to look at where we are in the flow. And Harry, are you having the slide?
I'll share. Okay.
Okay, so, well, it's week 3 this week. And we have 231 participants, so it's great to see so many be able to come. Last week we looked at the role of design, and so this one for this week today is very nicely building on that topic, looking at circular business models, and we'll share loads of examples that we are aware of, and we look really forward to hearing any other examples that you have come across that you're really inspired by. And use the chat for that, or also the Slack. And next week we'll dive into the topic of next level circular economy. So that's where we are now. And so Harry, oh yes, double webinars, that's a good one. So for week 5 and week 6, so there's we have 2 topics, as you probably have already heard. And you get to choose which one you want to participate in. So week 5 will be about plastics and cities. Same time, same day as usual, 26th of May, 3 p.m. British Standard Time. And week 6, fashion and food. So hearing from Make Fashion Circular and the food system initiative that we have, with special guests on all of the 4 topics. And that's again, same day, Tuesday, 3 p.m., just on the 2nd of June. And yeah, so links will be shared on Slack and on LinkedIn. And you get to then choose which one you get to go to. Yes, they will be recorded. So that's the good thing. If you miss out on a topic, you'll be able to see the recording afterwards and still get to enjoy both topics.
Thanks a lot, Monica. So first things first then, let's have a quick chat about the homework from last week. A couple of examples here. We had some very comprehensive systems maps, some really detailed and quite impressive. And this is one that I picked out, which I thought was particularly interesting. One that's quite relatable, looking at the systems surrounding the yoga mat, and specifically the PVC yoga mat, which is the most typical, most commonly used. And considering the huge upsurge in interest of yoga, I guess this is quite a significant issue now. There must be lots of them lying in landfill. So you can see here that you've got clearly the traditional linear pathway for this product mapped out. And one of the things that is quite interesting about this particular systems map is looking at how it breaks down not just sort of one circular opportunity, but actually 4 different opportunities for making this product a little bit less linear. And one of the interesting ones actually kind of speaks to Simon's point around design last week, where he was talking about, we're talking about designing out waste, and one of the simplest and most effective ways often of doing this is actually to go right back to material choices. And this has been captured here by saying, what if, opportunity number one, what if we change this into a compostable material such as cork, which is quite an interesting idea. I guess the challenge around that might be how hard wearing is cork, and would it last long enough to make it a viable option? Would people really be interested in composting yoga mats? But this particular example also speaks to a number of other circular economy strategies. So there's a reusable packaging option illustrated, and even a repair option as well. What if we could repair mats that were broken? And option 4, a deep cleaning or a disinfecting service. So bringing in some service elements to enable a sharing economy of yoga mats. Would that kick off, I wonder? It's hard to say. It's quite a personal item, and I'm not sure how people would feel about sharing yoga mats. I know I have in the past, and probably many of you have. But some interesting insights here. So thank you for this one. This came from Bonya Lung. So, and over to you, I think now, Monica, to chat about this week's Monday question.
Yes, so there's quite a bit that came in, and so thank you everybody for your entries, your shares around. So the Monday question was, what's the business model? What's the business case for a circular economy? And I picked a few. There were so many good answers, and so yeah, I just picked a few to share with you. Nervid said that a circular business case needs to answer and even exceed the expected value of the stakeholders and not just the shareholders, which is a really important point. And Antonio gave a brief summary, summarizing it to 4 points. Give the company a great reputation, decrease material losses, decrease energy consumption and raw inputs, which he relates to also how that would save costs. Kaushik talked about closing the loop at the end of life, gives the business a sustainable competitive advantage, and it creates greater trust and responsibility in the eye of the investors. And Miran also summarized it really well in 4 points with slightly different nuances to Antonio. So she talked about generating value with less resources and energy, and reducing the amount of waste, reducing the cost of production. That relates to the first point. Adaptability to changeable markets. So we see the prices, they're not stable. There are other risks. So it's a risk mitigation strategy as well. And the last point about creating better relationships with clients and users, which we heard a lot as well. So yeah, thank you everybody who gave it a thought and posted some answers. It was really rich to read through.
And somebody put in a really good one as well around the business case being you could make one product and sell it twice, rather than having to make multiple products and sell them multiple times. So you'd reduce the costs enormously like that. And I think that's quite an interesting and a simple way of putting it, because what that does is really shift the whole incentive and the whole way in which you design. If you're going to build one product but sell it multiple times, then obviously that is a really good thing that you can do. Thanks, Monica. So I'll stop sharing here, and you can introduce.
Yeah, are we ready to introduce our special guest for today? Or was there any other announcement you were going to make?
Maybe just a reminder at this point that if you have any questions, please just put them into the chat as normal, and we'll try and answer as many of them as we possibly can.
Great, thank you. And so with us today we have Joe Murphy, and he's been with the foundation for quite some time now, and he's heading the business network in the foundation. So he's a great person to talk about today's topic, and also share with you numerous examples of where we see those different business models come to life. So without further ado, I'd like to say a big hands up and applause to Joe Murphy joining us.
Hi.
Hello, there you are. Okay, hey Joe. So thank you so much for making it onto our call today. Well, I suppose just to share with the London cohort here, what inspired you about the circular economy? What I know that you, if I remember correctly, I think you changed careers at some point and looked for something new, and then ended up with the foundation. So what made you, make that jump to a different topic, and what inspired you about the circular economy?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. What inspired me? I remember the very report that I read. It was the first issue of the RSA journal. So if people are aware of the RSA, an institution focuses on design in the UK, and they created this quarterly journal, and the very first one was looking at circular economy. And I was at the time trying to not be an accountant. So I trained as an accountant. I was trying to get out of that world and move into, I suppose, more creative space. And I was just reading this thing, and it was just a number of thought pieces on the way we make things, the way we use things. And the most inspiring kind of insight was this just kind of connection to thinking about the system, so thinking about, you can make a product, but where that product ends up and the design choices that you make in the first instance, the implications that can have further down the line, and just this, how connected everything is. And when you take that lens, the potential to kind of profoundly change that was just incredibly exciting. It felt elegant, it felt clean, it felt attractive. And I was just into it basically from then on. And then I just kept calling the MacArthur Foundation until someone gave me a job 6 years ago.
Thank you. And what are you doing now in the foundation?
As you say, my role is to lead the C100 network, which is our kind of business innovation network. So it consists largely of big corporates who are committed to the idea of circular economy. They're at various stages of figuring out how to do it. And they join our network as one of the inputs to that thinking. So they join it to learn from us and from research and people in our world that are working on relevant kind of pieces of research, and from others. So really creating this kind of peer-to-peer environment. And it's not just big business. We have cities, universities, startups, kind of weird and wonderful NGOs. So it's a very eclectic group, and it's all about that pre-competitive collaboration and peer-to-peer learning and sharing.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that I got quite excited about when I joined the foundation, hearing about that pre-competitive collaboration space across sectors. So well, you've seen quite a lot in the years that you've been with the foundation. And is there any particular example that that hooked you the most, that you're most excited about and would like to share with the others?
Yeah, my favorite. I'm going to share my screen if I can. 1 second. So my favorite is a company called Stuster. So hopefully you guys can see that. So this is kind of half because of the model and half because of the person who's kind of a long time kind of collaborator with the foundation. So Stuster, basically, the idea was they used to have this image on their website of someone's garage, and it's in like the States, everyone has huge garages and they're just full of stuff. And it had this picture of this crazily crowded garage, and it was saying, why does this happen? This is a pain point for everyone. Why do we accumulate so much stuff? Why aren't we creating greater liquidity of the stuff that we own? And so the founder, John Atchison, basically had the insight that if you were to have the information of the value of your stuff, very real-time, live information on the value of your stuff, that would act as an incentive for you to sell on things that you're not using, things that are obsolete, old kid's bike, the surfboard that you bought and can never stand up on, which is something that I can relate to very personally. but all of this stuff that you just accumulate over time. So what John did was build an app which is kind of plumbed into lots of secondary marketplaces, eBay, Gumtree, Craigslist, depending on the country, they're plumbed into all of them. And you can upload your products and it will give you an automatic price. So what that's selling for at the moment, you can press one button essentially, and it will sell that item for you. Someone will come to your house, collect it and take it, and they will handle the courier. So Stuffster's basically the back end that enables you to sell things through eBay or Gumtree or wherever with zero kind of pain point. So that was their first iteration, and every kind of business model does often have a pivot. The pivot that they had to make was that it was actually too much of a pain point for people to go around uploading their own stuff. So what they are doing now is integrating with retailers and integrating into their point of sale system, so that everything that you buy, there's a record of automatically. So for example, John Lewis, really large retailer in the UK, they piloted Stuffster with their loyalty customers, so they're kind of high value customers. Because they have a loyalty account, they have a history going back since, for years, decades of all of the purchases they've made through John Lewis. So instantly when you logged into Stuffster, you had a kind of inventory of all of the things you bought through John Lewis, and you had real-time pricing for everything. And John Lewis would essentially pay you for those items in John Lewis store credit, and Stuffster would then liquidate them and they would sell them through secondary market. So it was like a reward scheme they piloted with this smaller group of customers, and now they're looking to roll out. So great, because it takes a very simple thing. We already have ways of selling secondhand stuff. We don't do it because it's hard and it's complex, and this just took all of the pain out of it. So that's mine, and I wanted to throw it back at you guys a little bit and take a bit of the spotlight off and just say, what's yours, because there are many.
Joe, it'd be great if you could stop sharing your screen at this point.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
Thanks. Mo, do you want to tackle this one first?
Yeah, sure, I can go for it. I like one that I had the opportunity to meet the founder of this of Fairphone, and he talked about how Fairphone came to life. So Fairphone is a smartphone, and for them it was also about the bigger. It was also more of an activism of it had an educational element of showing something that works in a particular way, and through that educate people around certain causes. And so I found that very inspiring when he shared that story. And what's interesting about Fairphone is that that for me, that's why one of the examples I like is that we can all relate to it. We all have a smartphone, and Fairphone is a smartphone, and we know what it's like when the screen breaks or when something doesn't work anymore, and we have to get rid of it and get a new smartphone if we choose to stay with the whole smartphone idea, which most of us, that's life. Most of us have one now, and it's part of our culture. So Fairphone allows you to exchange different parts of it. So it's looking at the concept of modularity, which you might remember from last week's webinar. And so you can exchange the battery, the camera, or the screen if it stops working, and purchase the replacement pieces for a really reasonable amount. It doesn't cost a fortune, and you can repair it yourself. So I like that, and I like so it extends the product life of it, but I also like the educational piece, and because you see people all carry their smartphones, it's very visible when they put it on the table. So every time something like this is being put down, it can easily start a conversation and educate people about issues around precious metals, around all sorts of issues that come with the production of smartphones.
Cool, thanks, Mo. I'll share mine. Mine's actually a local example from the Isle of Wight, a company called T-Mill, who are actually 5 minutes down the road from where I'm sitting right now. And T-Mill, you may have been introduced to them in a previous webinar, but they provide an open source platform for on-demand t-shirt printing. which is really cool. And the fact that it's on demand tackles the kind of surplus stock problem. And what's really interesting is that they use 100% organic, non-toxic materials. And so their t-shirts, at the end of their life, they ask consumers to send them back to the company, and they break them down and remanufacture them so that old t-shirts become new t-shirts. And so, which is a really cool thing. They say that our consumers have become our suppliers, which is a really nice kind of reciprocal back and forth thing that they've got. And to incentivize people to actually return these items, you get, I think it's something like £5 credit in the store for a t-shirt, for example. So you've definitely got an incentive to return these materials back to the manufacturer, and they can have a second life. So quite a nice innovative example from the Isle of Wight.
Maybe just to come in on that, Harry, so just talking about the business model piece of this, and one of the kind of more attractive ideas from a business model perspective when you think about kind of circulation of products and you know, things coming back, your customers becoming your suppliers, which is a lovely way of phrasing it, is that normally when you buy something today, you have one interaction with your customer, and you know, you put in a lot of money, a lot of advertising, a lot of investment to get them into your store to have that one interaction, and they're off and they're gone, and you don't see them again until they come back to buy another thing. So part of the appeal with some of the product as a service models or some of the reuse models is that you design in to your product, to your business model, this kind of return of your customer. So the cost that you're investing each time in getting your customer to come back reduces significantly. And then if you layer on this idea that people are using store credit, you know, store credit, I mean, pounds in real life are way more, or dollars, or wherever you are, they're more expensive than store credit pounds or dollars, because your profit margins, you know, are all baked into that. So there are many ways and many levers that you can use to turn this kind of idea of that a higher turnover of stuff, a higher, you know, more dynamic movement of stuff between you and your customers into actual revenue opportunities, but also kind of data capture opportunities about use, about customer demands, what they like. So it's just, there are many kind of layers to the business model onion.
So it all sort of translates into increased brand loyalty.
Could be, right? Customer, like a greater number of touch points. The brand piece is another one, because, you know, if people want to feel good, right? They want you to take the pain of trying to be a good person out of their lives, right? They want to make it easy, easy for you to do the right thing, to feel good about the products that you're using. So again, there's this kind of brand equity piece, which is another dimension to when you're thinking about business model and creating value for customers.
When we're trying to engage the businesses in our network, which is part of your role, do we need to kind of really explicitly state this case to them in order to bring them on board, or do they get this intuitively?
I think the reality is that the majority of the businesses that we're talking to, that we're working with, get it. I mean, they get it when they talk to us. You know, they're normally, we have a lot of inbound traffic, so it's people finding us and saying, you know, it might not necessarily be the whole company's committed to this idea. It might be a kind of guerrilla group inside that organization that are trying to push this agenda, and they're reaching out to try and get some support. They're seeing us working with a number of other companies, and they're using that as inspiration to convince their colleagues or their bosses that this is actually a viable and feasible kind of business strategy. And, you know, look, they're doing it, so why aren't we doing it? And actually, it's kind of, we look bad because we're not doing anything on it. So I think the kind of cold, cool pitch on circular economy is quite hard, because, you know, there's a lot of compelling logic in there, but it's so reliant on seeing the world a certain way and believing that it's quite hard to kind of convince the complete unconvincible, if you know what I mean. So generally, our conversations start with that people are teasing around it, they want to find out more, and they come to us as the first port of call in most instances.
Yeah, I mean, that's really
So
interesting.
Mark,
Mo, do you want to go?
just yeah, just noticing a question that came in from Nicole, where the question is around, is it brand loyalty or customer lock-in? Not saying that lock-in is a bad thing, but switching costs and stress are generally higher than staying with your current option. So yeah, is there anything around that you can say that you noticed from brands we work with around the kind of balance between brand loyalty or customer lock-in?
Yeah, I guess there may be two ways of talking about the same thing. One just sounds a bit worse than the other. Is that? I mean, that's how I'm interpreting it. I mean, obviously, customer lock-in sounds a bit more mechanical, in that you kind of design in this lock. You know, it's something that you have to unlock to get out of. I think it's both, and it depends on the product, it depends on the business, it depends on the sector, it depends on the customer. It was more the kind of principle I was trying to get across of, when you think about creating value, and your business model needs to create value for all of the stakeholders involved in it for it to work. Having some of this kind of repeat contact, repeat interaction with your customers is the source of value.
Great. Joe, we've got another interesting question come in. How do we pitch circular economy business models to leaders in the industry who are not fully convinced of the circular economy? How do we win round the tough ones?
So I mean, you know, I would say the pitch kind of comes in two pieces, really. So, and in a way, I think you could map them roughly to kind of revenue and costs. So if business is all about profit, really, fundamentally, then you want to do things that either increase your revenue or reduce your costs, right? So on the revenue side, it's about making arguments that are saying it's about creating a competitive advantage. So getting into some of the kind of brand, you know, you will stand out from some of your competitors because of the activities you're doing, because you're making very progressive moves and you're creating these innovative new models. You will stand out against your competitors on the supermarket shelf, and that will actually lead to an increase in revenue because people will pick your product over the neighboring product. Or it could be, well, maybe that's right. Yeah, it could be this idea that, you know, I like an idea that you sell one thing 5 times, right? So again, if you're multiplying your revenue streams off your kind of material costs or your product cost, increased revenues. So there's a number, you can, you know, we can go. On the cost side, there is a very strong argument is around staying ahead of regulation, staying ahead of policy. So particularly in Europe, but also in Asia, there is increasing kind of governmental focus and pressure on material sourcing, health and safety materials, recycling, recovery. A lot more burden is being placed on the businesses or the producers of stuff to take some responsibility. So extended producer responsibility schemes that exist for certain segments are essentially are seen almost as a tax or an additional cost. So if you can have business models that keep ahead as that regulation comes onto you, it's always better because you've designed in. You're not reacting to something as a shock and you know, a cost that's being put on you. You're actually factoring that into your business planning and your strategy. And the other one on the cost side is around sourcing of materials. So finite resources, you know, and I know that oil price at the moment is absurdly low. So it's not necessarily always the most watertight argument, but we do have finite resources. They're going to get harder and harder to source. Conflict minerals, you know, in electronics, for example, you know, they're messy supply chains, they're risky, they're riddled with risk. How do you extract yourself from those risky areas, those potentially high cost areas through fines or just through availability shocks, and actually be looking to create a more consistent sourcing that could actually see you through into the future because you're kind of reusing, recycling, recapturing. So I would frame it around increase income, reduce costs.
Yeah. So Joe, I'm aware you have some more great examples to share, and I'm just noticing what great questions are coming in from the people on the call. So we have one from Saskia, which is similar to what Tan was asking beforehand around scaling. So what are the challenges for much larger businesses to shift their business models towards circular? Have any done it at any scale with positive or negative effects?
Yeah, what are the challenges? I mean, it's just the size of some of these companies, the volumes that they're dealing with. You know, so Unilever, I think they reach 1 billion customers every day. You know, I mean, it's like that, just absurd numbers of people every day interacting with a Unilever product. And if you just think about what that means from the plumbing behind that, behind the scenes, the volumes, you know, it's such a huge machine and system to start to change, that I think a lot of that is the biggest challenge, really, when you talk about doing it at scale. A lot of the examples will show will be startups that are growing into this space that don't have legacy challenges, or they will be kind of pilots that are coming out of big businesses as they're trying and they're testing things. But to shift the tanker is a big, that is literally what it's doing. It's taking many small turns to eventually see a kind of a material, you know, a significant change. So I would say scale is the biggest barrier. Are some of them there at the end of the presentation, just a little insight into who is making progress and how you make progress? Because there is, in a large company, there is a lot of effort going into kind of setting up the enabling conditions for change. And it's that tanker analogy. You need to get the incentives aligned for employees. You need to think about transition, material sourcing. Any change you make has profound implications. You need to think about sourcing new materials at serious volumes and set the right conditions in place that actually enable circular models.
That leads quite, I mean, there's this interesting, because Tan also asked the second question, which I thought was really good to ask and relates to what you're just saying, is how, have you seen any businesses implement circular economy throughout their supply chain? So especially as we talk about the big corporates, are there any good examples that you have come across?
Yeah, I mean, there's some great examples. I mean, so if we think about Adidas, one of the examples maybe I'll just pull up my slides if it's all right, because it's nice to have a bit of a visual, and I'll just jump through them a little bit. We'll come back to these. Well, here we go, Patagonia and Adidas. How do I go back on the, there we go. Patagonia, great one. So, I mean, when you talk about brand equity, so Patagonia have basically, they kind of made recycled materials cool. You know, they made like, it's a competitive advantage to them. They overtly advertise the fact that your fleece is made from recycled polyester. And they've turned that into a kind of desirable thing. They also encourage repair, you know, so they do these kind of stunts in a way, like the opposite of Black Friday. And around this kind of increased need for consumption, they take those moments and they say, stop buying Patagonia stuff, just repair what you've got, you know, use the manuals, you can send them in to us, we will repair things for you. So they have really kind of, I mean, completely authentically done well out of this kind of, you know, this kind of what it stands for, to want and to own a Patagonia piece of clothing, and what you stand for by wearing that and wearing a bag or a fleece. Another example is this Adidas shoe. So this is quite revolutionary because it's made of one single material. So it's made of one type of plastic, which means when you think about end of life and it ending up in a kind of big, kind of messy, chaotic, loud, busy recycling center, the costs to separate out into the correct material streams so that you can actually recycle and get a high purity of recycled material out the other end, having a single material just designs out all the complexity of that, because you can just chuck it in the bin that all the others go in. So it's, you know, again, and this is kind of material choices, taking complexity out of the system, and this is a nice little example of that.
Just an interesting point on the Adidas thing. We had at our summit last year, we had one of the main designers working on this project, and it was really interesting hearing from him. He said that their team of people had been working on this for, I think it was 10 years. It just gives you a sense of the scale of the challenge just to produce a shoe in this way.
Mm. And I think one of the challenges is, I mean, when you think about trainers, you know, it's the foamy sole versus the kind of, you know, the knitwear of the kind of canvas topping, the laces. So that actually, we're asking many different performance functions out of the same underlying material, and that is becoming increasingly possible with technology. So one of the reasons we have many different types of materials in products is because we've had to get the right functionality, we've had to, you know, basically create a cocktail of materials. What is happening when it comes to material innovation, but also materials manufacturing technology, is that we can start to design some of the complexity out. But again, I think this is a cool example. I mean, well, the one thing I kind of hesitate with that is that it leads into this kind of technology will save us like space, which when it comes to circular business models, I just don't think is the case. I think actually there's a lot that can be done without relying on breakthrough technology to enable innovation. But absolutely true. That is also a massive unlock.
Great, thanks, Joe. We've got another really good question.
Would you guys like to just run through? Sorry, go on.
Just going to say, have you got some more examples you want to share, Joe, or do you want to tackle some questions that are coming in?
No, let's stick with the questions. They're good. They're hard.
Okay, so we've got here is an interesting one. It says, are there particular industries which circular economy business model works better in than others?
Yes. I mean, in theory, yes. So in some ways, if you have...
Joe, can I just ask you to stop sharing the slide?
Yeah. So in theory, yes. So in some ways, if you have larger, bigger products or things that don't move around very much, like a building or a car or a train line, that should be easier to apply a circular model to, because you know what materials are where, right, for their life cycle. So the ability to then think about disassembly, reuse, recycling, should be less complex. So in the built environment, we are seeing a kind of a massive uptick in the change in the way buildings are designed to be more flexible throughout their use phase, but also to be disassembled at the end of life. And that leads to quite interesting ideas like buildings as material banks, and examples around how that then leads to very different financing questions. So if you are raising money to start a construction project, if you have a higher residual value in your project, because you can disassemble your building at the end of life, it leads to it's a different risk profile and it's a different financing cost. So there is some very interesting stuff happening in the built environment. Also, when it comes to, we're seeing a lot of work happening around kind of consumer products and plastics, and that a lot of that is almost the opposite, because they're kind of highly kind of disposable items. Almost, there's kind of very low value, often, bottles of shampoo or wrappers for things, and they're just highly dispersed. So they're everywhere, they're very small, low value everywhere. It's almost the opposite of a building. But because of the kind of changing in customer demands and what people want to see from their products, we're seeing quite a lot of innovation in that area. And so reusable packaging solutions, and I have an example of Loop, who do a kind of Haagen-Dazs ice cream reusable container, and it's made of steel and it keeps your ice cream cold, and they have a kind of they have a subscription service, you know, so there are some great examples where almost at both ends of the spectrums we're seeing it.
There's one example I can also share that I've come across in working with Philips, and that comes from the healthcare sector, where Philips has the model of taking back 100% of all their large medical equipments from the hospitals. So in the space of large capital equipment or large capital, that is something that works quite well, because there are not that many of them, and they're fairly expensive. So having that sort of model works also much better for the hospitals. So they're being serviced, they get a functioning good piece, and that doesn't have to be reproduced all the time.
And I think just on that one, I think kind of function's key there. So as a customer, if you're a hospital, you only care about function, right? So if you can get function at a reduced cost because it's a refurbished model, you just don't, does it matter if it has a few scratches on the side? I don't even know if it would, but yeah.
Right.
So
Well,
have we seen examples where the competitors are pushing each other? Maybe it's in our network, maybe it's just examples you know of, where the business, they're just going kind of, you know, they're playing off against each other and developing new innovative ways of working.
Yeah, I mean, so that you know, we talk about the idea of kind of positive competition between businesses. I mean, because they're always pushing off each other, and but it's normally on a kind of price, you know, price race to the bottom competition to create the lowest kind of cost product and to, you know, acquire more customers. Yeah, I think we are seeing it again. It's about that brand equity piece. So I think what we more see is a few real standout leaders in a kind of industry. So, you know, Unilever is a good example. You know, they don't necessarily, I mean, they have huge volumes, but they're still only a small percentage of the market when you think about Procter & Gamble and other companies. They have a reputation for being a bit a step ahead on a lot of these issues and topics. And that has led to an element of competition. So there is a bit of a, like, you know, maybe we want to try and knock Unilever off that perch a little bit from the other, from their competitors, which is a great thing, right? Because that leads to ultimately more investment in these types of solutions. So yeah, it does exist.
Are the big, you know, are the big players like Unilever, are they looking to some of the, you know, we have an emerging innovator network. Are they looking to some of the smaller scale startups who, they, like you say, they don't have this legacy piece, are able to implement circular economy strategies from the get-go? Are they, you know, are they trying to take ideas from those guys?
Yes, I think, I mean, don't quote me on this. I should have double checked, but I think Unilever are working with Loop. So I'm not sure. I think Haagen-Dazs might be a Unilever product. I mean, I can do some checking afterwards and follow up in the Slack. Absolutely, it's a massive space, because again, due to size and due to the nature of these companies, they do find it hard to innovate. They do find it hard to do new things, because often these things can clash or compete with business as usual. And that can be very hard when you're in an environment that has basically been created to do one thing really, really well and become hyper resistant to the outside world kind of distracting them or taking them off track. When you have a kind of internal, you know, kind of energy pushing in a different direction, it's almost like the machine kind of rejects it. So it can be very difficult to actually launch and scale innovative projects within the organization, and often kind of acquiring or joint venturing or partnering or piloting through startups is a great way for them to learn, test new things with customers, and also ultimately, if they do the deal, then kind of basically acquire the innovator. So Stuster have worked with John Lewis, as I said. They're also working with Adidas now. So yes.
Cool. I guess we haven't spoken much about frameworks, but maybe we should just touch on the fact that there are a number of different kind of business model frameworks existing, and you've said yourself there's no silver bullet. We shouldn't get hung up too much on labels and categories, but is it worth giving a nod to what's out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've gone totally off track with the my killer slide presentation, which is great actually, because the questions have been awesome. But we did think a bit ahead about this kind of how do you answer the how do I do it question? How do I come up with a circular business model? And I think that's absolutely right, Harry, that there just isn't a silver bullet answer. There's not the one kind of framework or the one resource you can go to and read. It actually much more about iteration and kind of working from kind of first principles. I did want to just quickly cruise through a few options where there are frameworks, just to show people. So if anyone wanted to have a look afterwards. So this is on the publications section of the Foundation's website. We've got a pretty old report now called Growth Within, which was kind of one of the first big reports the Foundation wrote on circular economy, and really kind of drew attention to the topic. Through that, again, these are slightly dated. I mean, you can just look at some of the companies, although most of them are, BlaBlaCar, most of them are still doing well. So we said, if you think about breaking this kind of circular economy idea down into kind of more actionable levers, then the Resolve framework are this set of levers. So, models that regenerate, that actually shift to renewable sources, restore health of ecosystems, models that share, so the Airbnbs, but actually allow that sharing of assets, models that optimize, increase efficiency, or models that loop materials, or if you just design out materials completely, so you virtualize. So Netflix flipping from kind of DVDs to streaming, it's a great example of that. And exchange, so there's more substitution, where you take out problematic materials and you kind of input materials that are safer, better for the system. I don't know if you guys have covered Ecovative on that. So Ecovative do the mushroom-based packaging. So it's a substitute for polystyrene, which is a highly problematic, pretty much unrecyclable plastic. But it's really bulky and padding. It's what you get if you buy electronics, wrapped in polystyrene. And Ecovative created the mushroom-based alternative, which was compostable. So if you imagine utopian scenario where you have your compost heap in your garden, you order your new laptop and it comes wrapped in Ecovative, and you just bang the packaging straight in your compost heap, and it actually is regenerative, so it's additive to that compost. I think they're now making wall dividers. Anyway, so this is one framework with a few levers. There's a whole book on reuse models. So this is on the same website under the reuse. There's a whole load of different models that have been profiled. SodaStream, I've got one of those downstairs, although I actually need a refill right now. Replenish, they just ship the concentrate and you reuse your actual kind of device, or the packaging that kind of applies the product. And then, but at the top, they've got a bunch of frameworks that just help you kind of make sense and think about reusable or refillable options. So that's some stuff on our website. Accenture, this is horribly small, but let me zoom in. They have their 5 circular business models. And again, they've kind of tried to map them on this kind of visual circle. Lots of similarity here, right? Sharing platforms, extending product life, supply, picking the right materials and circular supplies, recovering resources. So this is kind of waste equals food. Like, how do you convert existing waste streams into kind of feed for yours? And that can happen in a very cool way when you think about industrial symbiosis on the manufacturing side. You're connecting these networks of manufacturers where waste from one site can be an input to another. And I think it's quite a cool example of a sugar, I think it was British sugar factory in the UK that had a CO2 kind of out vent on their system diagram. And someone spotted it one day and thought, well, that would make a great input to growing tomatoes in one of the largest greenhouses in the UK now exists right next to their factory. So that just, some of that kind of waste equals food ideas. Circular design guide. This, if you haven't seen it, maybe you touched on it last week, has got a bunch of kind of methods for how to think about, mainly on the define section. So how do you think about defining your opportunity, wrapping a business model around it? That links to the business model canvas. And they've also got in the resources section a couple of strategies that are inspiration. So product as a service, and the Philips example where you stop selling the product, you sell subscription services. So again, it's that kind of repeat business. You retain ownership of all the materials. And a number of others, embedding intelligence, so IoT technology is enabling track and trace of where products are, what condition they're in. That allows you as a business to actually be a bit more intelligent about how you do repair, remanufacturing models. And the last one was just this OECD framework. So there's quite a hefty report on their website, but within that, on page 27, they again differentiate between these 5 kind of levers or business model strategies, and they're not mutually exclusive. There's overlap between them. So for example, product life extension and product service system, which is essentially product as a service. Your product as a service model does extend the life of your product, essentially, should do. So they're not completely there's overlap, but this goes into some detail about what sectors, where we're seeing some of these business model types come online in what sectors. Yeah, that went back to an earlier question, but just to say there's not one answer, but there's a lot of resources out there to dig through.
Thanks, Joe. That was really good to see. There was an interesting question that came up, which I think related quite well to the Accenture slide related to the supply chains. And the question was around whether it's businesses, like large companies, who have to take care of their reverse logistic procedures and across the supply chain, or whether companies such as DHL or others, USP, play a role, or whether you have come across any businesses that step into that niche or that kind of gap here to help with closing some of the loops and supporting that reverse logistics process.
Yes, so the big logistics companies are really interested in it. And we've worked with DHL when we've had really good conversations with FedEx. So absolutely, it's a massive opportunity for them. I don't think there have been enough kind of models at scale for us to really start feeling or seeing a kind of DHL reverse logistics system, like, that is in our faces. But if you think about returning online shopping and having these nodes, that's often how it works. You have to walk to a local kind of newsagent in the UK or shop, and there'll be kind of collection nodes. So the return infrastructure does exist. Yeah, so I think it's out there. Absolutely, it's a massive opportunity. Amazon also did a Stuffster-like option. It was only in the US, and I think it was piloted, where when you were checking out for your latest purchase, it gave you an option to resell something you'd had before. So, and Amazon would do the collection at the same time. So they were trying to use that drop off as a collection. So they're pushing into it as well.
Okay, so there's one more burning question before we have to wrap up. I think we're getting into the last 5 minutes. So there's a bit of a yes, the tension that might arise from some of these examples, like Adidas or like Patagonia even. But yeah, just looking at the Adidas example, we heard of with this great design, but at the same time, does that cause any more any more kind of resource waste, or not resource, but energy waste and other kind of negative effects that it has, but particularly around the theme of greenwashing. And I mean, particularly when we look at brands like Coca-Cola or other brands that come up, and there's always this, but, and other things that come up. And what would you say around greenwashing and around, how to maybe disseminate the good stuff from the less so, and what would be your advice and your take on the naysayers?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Save the hardest one till last. Maybe we should have just ended a few minutes ago. That would have been more convenient. No, it's a super question. It's obviously something we challenge ourselves with all the time. Of course, all of these examples, particularly in the big companies, there's major companies, for every kind of 0.5% of highlight, there's 99.5% of just the same old business as usual stuff going on. I think someone's jumped on. There's a bit of background noise. So yeah, I mean, there's absolutely, like this, the machine is still going. They're still producing high volumes, and they're still causing a massive part of the problem. They're still driving the problem. But equally, there's a element of supporting the people in those organizations that are trying to win the argument, that are trying to win that battle, and actually in only in the 6 years that I've worked, I've seen the profile of these types of initiatives and the teams that are working on them become higher and higher profile. These essentially, these topics are now kind of CEO agenda topics. They're not like pet projects anymore. If you want to be considered a progressive business in any kind of sense, you have to be having an answer to the question of how are you going to have a viable business in 25 years time, or 20 years time, or 15 years time? What are you doing to tackling some of these global challenges that we all face? So there's a massive increase of pressure, and there has been, as a result of that, there has been a significant increased investment in these strategies and these pilots and these tests. But it's turning the tanker, right? So I think what we try to do is celebrate the steps that are being made, the commitments, the investments, the experimentation, the R&D, the hugely long lead times that it does take to figure this stuff out, but actually continue to raise the ambition level and want people to go faster and challenge people to go faster. And that's what they want. They want us to do that. Often the people we work with in these organizations want us to demand more from them, because that helps them go back and win the argument and say, look, if we don't hit this level, we're not going to be considered a high performer in this space anymore. So really, it's behind all of this, there are people trying to do the right thing and trying to win the argument.
And just sneaking in one on a high, and kind of relating back to when you joined the foundation and what inspired you around the circular economy, and now in as few words as possible, what has been the most inspiring to you around your work, of what you're seeing in 2020?
I just think it has been that if you take a step back, you don't think week by week, month by month, but you take a step back on that time horizon of years, and you say, where are we as an organization now? It's been an incredible journey for us as the topic has just exploded. But where is it? Where does this sit? It now feels like it's in a different sphere of seriousness, really, and that's it's reflected in the conversations you had. It's reflected, I've seen people on the other side, so people who have been representing this topic in their organizations who have had unbelievable career journeys over the last 6 years, because they've gone from being the lone voice to suddenly being like, we need an answer on circular economy. That guy's been talking about it for a few years. He needs a team, she needs a team, they need resources. So it's been some incredible individual journeys behind this, of people who have been bold to stand up for and back these strategies before the kind of the heat got turned up. And I do think the heat's getting turned up, and that's inspiring. but it needs to happen. It needs to happen quickly. It needs to happen at scale. Yeah, so there's still a huge amount more to be done, and we're not, you know, we're not kidding ourselves about that by any stretch.
Thanks a lot, Joe. We could talk to you about this, but unfortunately we have come to the end. So time to present you with this week's homework. Twofold. First, to make a movie poster of the circular economy, a movie poster for the circular economy, and you can use Pixtel as a program to help details in Slack. And secondly, if you get back into your learning trios and maybe spend a half hour reflecting on this session, what you've heard from Joe and from all of us, and we'll share some guiding questions to help you during that reflection. Just another thing to say is that, yep, the next webinar will be on the 19th of May at 3 p.m. So we look forward to seeing you there. And thank you all very much for your brilliant questions, for joining us today, and we hope that you've learned something.
Coming in here, Harry, because it was hard to hear you a little bit. So I'm going to repeat the homework again. So the homework is to use Pixteller to create a movie around the circular economy, or make a movie poster. And all of that will be in more detail shared with you on the Slack channel as well. So thank you very much for joining us today. I had a really interesting time listening to Joe and seeing your questions and being part of this rich conversation. So thanks very much for your time, and have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Cheers.